You are a unique individual with the power to change lives just by being who you are, sharing your story. And I just messed that line up. It's totally fine. I love that. I don't say that often enough, right? Yes. Sharing your wisdom and telling your story. Excellent, everybody. Yes. Okay. So today, let's just do away with the introduction at this point because it's done. Welcome to Jen's Pen Live, guys. We scour the world and we are looking for interesting people who make the world a better place. And we have found one, and she's coming back. She's visiting us again. Sarah Dooling is here. She's the executive. Sorry, now let's see. Now I'm getting flustered. She's with the Massachusetts Climate Action Network, right? MCAN. She's the executive director. That's the correct. Okay, so Sarah, welcome back to the show. Last time you were here, we talked about how you got going. You were in the ecology kind of part of things, and then you're like, oh God, we have to talk to people because we need their, assistance and their cooperation. So you went and talked to people, and then you realized you kind of have to put it all together, and you went into urban planning.
Wow, that's great, Jen. Yeah, fabulous. And here we are, right?
And here we are. Although there were a couple of stories that you teased us with, one about getting chased by an alligator and another about a bear. We might have to delve into that later. But welcome back to the show.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for inviting me. I really enjoy talking with you and sharing what Mass Climate Action is really focused on. And I can certainly share my terrifying experience being on an all-terrain vehicle and chased by an alligator. And I was convinced my carburetor was going to flood out. And this was a mama alligator with her baby heading my way in the Everglades. Yep. And that, I will just say in Massachusetts, thinking back on my time as a biologist working in the Everglades, I was really humbled working there because it was so clear that, and I was like way out there in the glades. And, if I didn't come back, it would be really hard to find me. And that is kind of a humbling place to be, right? And it's a very different moment compared to now where MCAN specifically is so dependent on technology to bring us together virtually, so that we're using technology to find each other, right? And to leverage change, like the change we really want to see. So it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition.
It totally is. That's a good way to bind it all together there too.
Yes.
So we were just discussing before we got on here about technology and the work you're doing, bringing getting people involved with the various campaigns that MCAN is doing. Back in October, when we talked to you, we were discussing the Peabody Peaker plant and what was going on with that. I know that things have progressed a little. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. So maybe just to remind your listeners, back last spring, an entity called the Massachusetts Municipal Wholesale Electric Company, I call them MWEC, MMWEC. MWEC went to the state and was seeking approval to finance a peaker plant in Peabody. And a peaker plant is a plant that's only turned on very few hours during the course of a year, only when it's super hot or really cold. So it's really comes on when that peak is hit in terms of energy demand. So MCAN, we heard about this peaker plant from a resident in Wakefield. She came to us and she said, this project has been in development for the past 6 years. It involves, at that point in time, it involved 14 different communities, and those communities have what's called a municipal utility plant in their community. And it's useful maybe for listeners to understand that there are privately owned utilities like NGrid, National Grid, and Eversource. And then in Massachusetts, similar to other states in the country, there are public utilities. And the first one was built in Wellesley back in, I think it was 1882. They've been around a long time. And so 14 of these municipal or these public utilities had signed a contract that MWIC had put together, agreeing to be co-owners of a gas and oil powered peaker plant in Peabody. And this request that MWIC made of the state, specifically the Department of Public Utilities, came pretty close on the heels of Governor Baker signing the Next Generation Roadmap Bill, which has, subsequently become law, which, outlines a variety of emissions reductions targets in all sectors of our economy, including the municipal utilities, these public utilities. They also have to reduce their emissions and be net zero by 2050. So when we think about a fossil fuel powered peaker plant, that is actually contributing a significant amount of carbon-based emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. I think our estimates are 5,500 tons of CO2. So this is equivalent, I forget exactly what that's equivalent to, but this is not an insignificant amount of emissions that this peaker plant would generate in Peabody. Now, it's also, I think, important for folks to realize that this peaker plant is slated to be built in an environmental justice community in Peabody. And moreover, the way that pollution travels, it doesn't follow the boundaries of EJ communities or municipalities. However, it does travel with prevailing winds. And so this pollution can travel 10 miles from its original site of emission. So we're looking at a stationary source of emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, that will impact, obviously, folks that will live adjacent to this plant, but also folks across the river in Danvers that will be exposed to, increased rates of respiratory problems. And this is really the kinds of emissions associated with these super energy inefficient polluting plants tend to really be hard to handle for elderly folks and young kids.
Right.
And large in the lungs. And so this can, this is not at this point in time in Massachusetts efforts to become to have a cleaner energy portfolio across the state for both the private utilities and the public utilities. Investing in a fossil fuel based peaker plant is not logical. And it's a really risky financial investment that, given the current climate statutes, this proposed peaker plant will become potentially illegal in about 5 to 10 years. And then the ratepayers across these 14 towns, although 2 of the public utilities have requested to get out of that contract, but the ratepayers will be left, with paying off the debt to construct this plant. And the debt, the Department of Public Utilities, and they were the state agency that approved the financing. The financing is the first bond, which was rated and approved, is for $85 million, and a second bond is for another $85 million. So this is not, this is a substantial amount of money.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So this Peabody peaker plant is a problematic investment, and MCAN has been working with a local Peabody group called Breathe Clean North Shore and another environmental organization called Community Action Works in continuing to oppose this plant. So the DPU did approve financing, which is, this is a problem. And MCAN entered into litigation with the state, but for a variety of kind of interesting aspects of how the Department of Utilities function, they did not assign MCAN full legal status to enter into litigation. So in essence, at the end of the day, Jennifer, no one, no organization, no group of community impacted ratepayers was able to be in full litigation opposing the peaker plant. And that means none of the ratepayers were protected by the system, by the State Department of Public Utilities system as it stands now. So there you go. You know, dirty energy gets a free pass at GPU.
Let's dig into this. So what you're saying there is that the people who are actually directly affected, health-wise and in their pocket, have no say in what's going on.
In the context, right, in the context of entering into a lawsuit opposing the financing request, there was, because no organization was given full legal status by the Department of Public Utilities. In essence, there was no meaningful, substantial legal process. So there you go. So without a legal process, what are we left with? We are left with a political effort to reform DPU. And so that's where we are now.
And that's where we are now. Okay, all right. There's so many things that I want to talk about in this. Well, first off, I wanted to mention that the peaker plant, like you were saying, goes on basically when we need more energy, when the grid that we have is kind of maxed out. And people should know too that our demand for energy is only going to go up because we're getting more and more electronics, more like the cars are going to go electronic, everything is going to go electronic. So very shortly, we're going to have this much bigger demand than we have now. And that's going to make that thing go faster.
Well, potentially, I mean, potentially, I think it's useful, I think, to take a bird's eye view of how this one resource, and that's how the energy experts talk about peaker plants. They call it a capacity resource because it's
okay, right, to store energy, right? Okay, gotcha.
Right. So you know, as the grid modernizes, and by that I mean, you know, as our buildings become hopefully all electric, as our cars are all electric, you know, we have to couple electrical generation with conservation. And so that's another piece to this whole issue. I will also say that, you know, all electric buildings and all electric vehicles, they will become more and more efficient and therefore draw down less and less electricity per unit.
Okay.
Square foot or per vehicle. But that's an evolving trend. But you're absolutely right. We have to think about how to meet peak demand in a way that doesn't make people sick, right? That doesn't create what's called a stranded asset, where you're still paying off the house you bought, but it's worth nothing. You know, that's what happened in the 2008 mortgage and financial crisis in this country. And so this investment strategy on the part of MWIC in a fossil fuel peaker plant kind of has that same risk associated with it.
Just makes no sense. I mean, because I remember you were saying that it would cost the same amount to make a peaker or a plant that is much better for the environment.
Yes, absolutely. So Mass Climate Action, we reached out to another nonprofit called the Clean Energy Group, and they're based in Vermont. And this is what they do. They write reports that assess the feasibility of replacing what I would call a dirty peaker plant with clean energy technology options. And their report, which is up on their website, clearly outlines the feasibility of using battery storage technology on the existing site in Peabody. And when we think about clean energy technology like a battery storage system, you know, the emissions associated with that are, you know, typically confined to mining of lithium. You know, so there are lithium batteries, and lithium batteries are a problem because the way that they have been historically mined in Central and South America is problematic. You know, exposing those communities to toxins and sort of the undesired changes in the landscape after it's been mined for lithium. So, perhaps the lithium batteries are not the way to go. And thankfully in Somerville, there's a company called Form Energy, and they've been developing a different kind of battery. And so we have, in-state expertise, in-state R&D firms really doing some cutting edge innovative work on non-lithium kinds of batteries.
Wow.
So that's a design issue. That's fixable,
Mhm,
The
mhm.
key takeaway from the Clean Energy Group's report is that, the battery storage technology, it's less expensive to build, right? So the
Right.
ratepayer is going to be less financially on the hook for this. And it's cleaner. It's cleaner for people's health. It's cleaner for the environment. And it will continue to evolve as designs innovate over time. And so it's a real conundrum to me why MWEC is continuing to invest in this. And
That's my next question.
yeah,
Why?
right. So I'm not really sure why, Jen. I think I'm not sure. I think there's some, MWIC is committed. Their justification for this investment follows this logic that they are investing two bonds worth $85 million each into a fossil fuel peaker plant in Peabody that will serve 11 other communities around the state, because the revenue, and this is important to note, the revenue, the way the energy markets are structured in Massachusetts, these peaker plants generate revenue, right? They're a way for both private utilities and public utilities to make money.
Okay.
And so when the peaker plant doesn't even have to be turned on to make money. It just sits there and it can generate revenue for the 12 remaining public utilities that are in on this contract. And this is only because the different kinds of energy markets in Massachusetts have structured payments for this kind of capacity resource in this way. So this is a market, this is a structural part of the energy market in Massachusetts. So Mr. DiCurzio at MWEC has said to me repeatedly over and over that investing in a dirty peaker plant will allow revenue to be generated and distributed to the 12 municipal communities. And they will then take that money and wait for it, invest in clean energy.
Oh, that makes it all right.
So that is MWIC's justification and rationale for this particular project. And it, from a straight up just a conventional business perspective, it also doesn't make a lot of sense, because why, given the trend towards making investments in fossil fuels both financially risky and potentially illegal in the near-term future in Massachusetts, at any rate, it seems as if having that fossil fuel plant as the middle, like the mechanism in the middle to generate clean energy output, is unnecessarily complicated.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Like, I mean, it just makes me ask the question, like, whose pocket's getting lined? It's like, oh, okay, I'm like. So then my question goes to, why aren't the politicians getting involved?
That's an interesting question. So to be clear, Representative Sally Cairns.
There are some, yes.
From Danvers and parts of Peabody. She's involved. She's been very active in days of protest and days of action. She joined Community Action Works and MCAN and Breathe Clean North Shore and Extinction Rebellion of Boston when we all converged in downtown Boston and handed a petition asking the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs to to reopen an environmental review process of the peaker plant. And this is one remaining administrative avenue, but it has to be opened by the Baker administration. There is no existing way right now for somebody from one of the communities or even for an organization to jumpstart that process. So,
Sorry.
so Representative Cairns has been very involved, and then Senator Joan Lovely has also been very supportive of really pushing to redirect the investment away from a fossil fuel powered plant to something that is far less polluting, like a battery storage option for the peaker plant.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I didn't mean to paint with a broad brush. There are several legislators who are involved and passionate about it. So I didn't mean to, sorry everyone, I didn't mean to imply that. The problem is like the political will in general. So why isn't Charlie Baker doing something about it?
That's a really great question. And I'm not sure why Governor Baker is not doing anything about this. However, Mass Climate Action, we've been partnering with other organizations in really addressing, creating legislative fixes so that this doesn't happen again. And so one of the bills that was heard about today at the State House is called it's called the Citing Reform Bill. It has a very long name, and I'll read it out loud. So folks, if you're interested, you can look it up. It is House Bill number 3336, and it's called an act relative to energy facilities siting reform to address environmental justice, climate, and public health. And that is a mouthful, but basically, this bill does a couple of different things. And so it's targeting the sister organization to the Department of Public Utilities. And this sister organization is called the Energy Facilities Siting Board. And maybe some of your listeners remember last winter, there was the EFSB, as they're known. They held 2 8-hour meetings, virtual meetings, listening to people give comments on whether or not the EFSB should go forward with building an electrical substation in East Boston. And so this is a substation, this is part of our energy infrastructure. And this particular facility is, it's in a floodplain, it's in a community that has endured so many already existing polluting facilities. It's adjacent to within, as the crow flies, pretty close to Logan Airport. So yeah. It is, and during those 16 hours of testimony from all kinds of people, all kinds of organizations, not one person voted or recommended that this facility be built. However, the Facilities Siting Board unanimously approved the project. So this was a signal that we need reform in how decisions about our energy infrastructure are made.
Yes.
And so this particular bill, it does a couple of things. And so one, it would involve environmental justice residents prior to any formal filing made. And so this would give environmental justice residents a clear voice at the table before the filing process is initiated. And this is crucial. Oftentimes, like the folks continuing to oppose the East Boston substation, the notification of these filings is really limited. If you don't know where to look for them, you're not going to see it. So, and so MCAN is actually part of another group with other groups like Green Roots out of Chelsea and Neighbor to Neighbor on coming up with other reforms related to the notification process. But this bill in particular would give environmental justice residents an opportunity to engage with folks proposing an energy project before an official filing is made. So that's really important. And the other really important piece includes that the bill stipulates that something called a cumulative health assessment would have to be conducted. And so what this means is that, for example, if this bill was passed and the PBD peaker came up for review, it means that the assessment would include looking at what other existing polluting facilities are in the community, what are the cumulative effects of exposure to pollution that environmental justice residents are exposed to. So, and then what are the future emissions associated with, or the future burdens? They don't have to be limited to carbon-based emissions, but what are the future burdens associated with any kind of energy project for folks in environmental justice and frontline communities? So, in some ways, it's it's a bill that supports a data-driven approach that is centered in equity. And this is the trend nationwide of how public entities are thinking about deciding where to put our expanding energy infrastructure. So that's a really important piece. And lastly, I do want to highlight another component of this proposed bill, and that is lowering the threshold for projects to trigger review. So the PBD peaker plant, that's coming in at 60 megawatts. Right now, for a project to qualify to be reviewed by the EFSB, sorry, it's been a long day, EFSB, they have to generate 100 megawatts or more. And so by lowering that threshold, this bill proposes to lower it to 35 megawatts. We're going to capture more projects for review. And that's important because when we think, at the end of the day, these environmental justice communities have been exposed and overburdened, ever from the beginning of how we've expanded infrastructure in our country. And the time is now to center health equity, all towards moving towards a more just transition. This clean energy transition is going to be bumpy, and protecting the most vulnerable is so important going forward. And this citing reform bill will certainly get the state of Massachusetts closer towards enacting a just transition.
That's so good to hear that there's an effort to help the situation. It's just so discouraging to know, okay, it's happening. The energy, it's happening. We're gonna transition. It's happening. Why make it hard? Like, why not make your money doing that? I don't know. It just drives me nuts. I'm sure it drives you nuts too. But it's just
it does. And I do want to share one thing. So many organizations today in a virtual meeting submitted comments in support of the citing reform bill. And I had sent Mass Climate Action's comments to a couple of different organizations, just so, we're kind of all on the same page and we know who's saying what. And I heard back from an environmental justice organization called Green Roots, and their executive director wrote back to me, and she said, ironically, and MCAN's comments were really focused on the PBD peaker plant. And so Roseanne wrote, and she said, ironically, Green Roots' first interaction with the Energy Facilities Citing Board was for a peaker plant that was proposed along Chelsea Creek, next to the only public elementary school in that neighborhood. This was back in 2007. And one of Green Roots' arguments was that while the peaker plant was being permitted, once the infrastructure was built, it actually could run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every day of the year. And the penalty back then for operating beyond the 8-hour per day request was only a slap on the wrist. And that Roseanne then ended her note to me by saying, in fact, they realized that the company was fudging their numbers about emissions and about hours it would operate to underestimate the pollution that they would be emitting into Chelsea's air. And this was 15 years ago. And here we are today making the same case for reform. And I know, change takes a long time. I appreciate that. But I think today, after Governor Baker signed the Next Generation Roadmap bill, as the state moves forward on developing a net zero, developing the most stringent building code, potentially one of the most stringent building codes in the country, right? We have to, this is Mass Climate Action's position, really by centering the experiences and the long-term health and prosperity of environmental justice residents, that will allow all of us, right, to prosper and to enjoy the benefits of a clean energy and a renewable energy economy. But we have to start where we are hurting most.
Yes. So if someone wanted to get involved and help out, are there in Massachusetts with this specific cause, this specific campaign, or let's start there. If someone wants to get involved with your campaign, what can they do?
Oh, that's a great question. Mass Climate Action Network, you can go check out our website, and on our website, we do have a lot of information about the PBD Peaker, and our website is MASS, that's MASS, massclimateaction.org. We also convene a monthly chapter call the first Monday of every month at noontime. You don't have to be in a chapter. You don't have to be a member of MCAM. We need all hands on deck. And this is a great place to learn what other communities are doing, not only in terms of opposing dirty energy projects, but also really focusing on efforts like the most stringent building code in Massachusetts history. And in Mass Climate Action, we've been pivotal in making sure that that particular part of the climate bill stayed in the climate bill. So you can get involved in either opposing the PBD Peaker or really getting prepared for the upcoming state meetings about what is called a net zero stretch code for buildings. And that's just a technical way of talking about developing, hopefully, the most stringent building code in the state that has huge implications, once again, for improving indoor air quality. I used to love cooking with my gas stove years and years ago, and I was kind of I'm only going to cook with gas. Well, no, that's not the case anymore. If you think about it, we've been talking about power plants, having a gas stove in our kitchen is like having a power plant with none of the scrubbers, none of the pollution controls, right? So all that NOx and SOx, all those emissions, especially in older homes without proper ventilation, they end up in our lungs, right? And again, the very old and the very young are super susceptible to these respiratory responses, to this kind of very small particulate pollution that ends up in our bodies because we have gas-powered cook stoves. So those got to go, right? They just got to go. And
you got to make some sacrifices.
Right. And induction cook stoves, it's a different way of cooking, but it still does really good food,
I'm sure it does. I've been very pro gas stove just because of the amount of control that you have over what you're doing, but I will willingly make the sacrifice. Yeah, okay. I'm going to change my mind on that one. Yeah, I hadn't even really thought about that. So, okay, so we'll put all that information in the comment area. Also, you said get involved with the PBD Peaker plant thing, or get prepared What do you mean
Oh,
by
get
that?
prepared. So the state, and in this case, it's the Department of Energy Resources, DOER. They are the lead agency within the state that is developing a draft of the most stringent code for public comment. They're behind schedule, with COVID and who knows what else is going on, but they are required to hold 5 community meetings in diverse locations. I don't know at this point whether these meetings are going to be in person. I hope not. So I'm hoping that they're virtual, but it will be an opportunity for advocates around the state to respond to the code that the state puts forward. So for example, and the reason why MCAN is really focused on this is that when Governor Baker signed the Next Generation Roadmap Bill, and when Secretary Theo Hrade's also gave comments during the signing ceremony, neither one of them said, we look forward to the state developing a true net zero stretch code. They didn't use that language. The language that they did use, and Baker specifically said this, that he really wants to see a high energy performance code. These are very, and this may be confusing to people, but these are very different concepts. A high energy performance building can be, a house that's really well insulated, it's super efficient, but it's still powered by natural gas. Right. Versus what I call a net zero building, that always has, or an all electric building, it always has 3 components. One being all electric with a clean energy source for that electricity, super energy efficient. So again, the same kind of high quality, really thick insulation. And then lastly, and this is a key piece, these net zero homes and buildings have to have renewable energy available to them, either on site or folks have the ability to buy renewable energy off-site. So when we think about, for example, a storm that disconnects your house from the grid for 3 days, like what kind of system do you want that will make sure that your refrigerator still runs, right? That, any medical equipment is still able to operate, right?
Yes.
Right. So when we think about that, what is so key about these net zero buildings is that if you have renewable energy on your building and you have battery storage in your basement, that for 3 days, your building, your critical load for energy can still hum along because you're able to capture that renewable energy, store it on site in your batteries down in the basement. And because the home is so efficient, you won't necessarily notice that you're entirely disconnected from the grid.
What? The electricity's out? What?
Right, for up to 3 days. So,
wow.
So when we think about these concepts of, what kind of buildings are going to be really resilient, right? It's the building that is super efficient. It's all electric. It has renewable energy either on or able to get off site, and it has storage. So, and there's a big movement that, another organization of ours called HEAT, they've been working with Green Roots, an environmental justice organization out of Chelsea, to develop these microgrids. So, the trend of our grid is away from like these command and control centralized resources and moving much more towards distributed, decentralized, community owned and operated forms of clean energy.
It's funny, I did an interview with a woman a few months back who I think her company's called Dynamic Grid, and she was talking all about the decentralized energy system, and it's really something that's incredible to hear about. Honestly, it's really very interesting, and it's what's going to happen next. So let's just do it.
So let's do it. Let's not invest, right? Let's not invest in a fossil fuel peaker plant, right? In an environmental justice community that will create hardship, economic and health wise for vulnerable folks. Let's just skip over that bad decision and start investing in microgrids and start investing in, and making sure that our buildings, as we modernize our grid, right, that our appliances and our buildings and our cars are super efficient and far less polluting. And again, I think if we can do that where we hurt the most right now as a state in our environmental justice communities, then we can do it anywhere.
And Baker, and they're not really talking that way, you were saying. They're not talking about a stringent code, they're talking about high energy proficiency buildings.
Right. And that's why it's so important for your listeners, if you're interested in buildings, if you're interested in if you're interested in making sure we have healthy buildings, right? That our buildings are the second largest source of emissions in the state.
We should have started with that, Sarah. We should have opened this up.
Sorry. But we really need to make buildings protectors of our health, protectors of our communities, buildings and our utilities. And there are, the Citing reform bill is one way to do that. The net zero stretch code is another way to do that. And these legislative fixes, if you will give us a quilt that will help us move towards a just transition in the Commonwealth.
So if people aren't in Massachusetts, there is Climate Action Network all over the country, right?
Yes.
Okay, so they can get involved with their states.
Yes.
And yeah, okay, good. Because I didn't want anybody, well, I don't know how long someone not from Massachusetts will have listened to us, but
well, Massachusetts is in this group of states considered to be doing progressive work in the energy sector. There's New York, California, Ithaca, for your listeners, the city of Ithaca, they've committed to a really large scale decarbonization of, 7,000 to 8,000 of their buildings, something like that, and leveraging private capital to do that, because government doesn't have the funds to do this at all. We have to leverage private capital. So Ithaca is really on the ball. Block Power is one of the lead groups accelerating that project. So, Massachusetts, we are, I hope we continue to enjoy hanging out with these other states. And in many ways, the feasibility of that depends on, quite honestly, advocates saying, look, pass the Citing reform bill. Let's make sure the state develops the most stringent building code possible while not generating economic hardship for folks living in environmental justice communities and low-income housing. So, taking an equity-centered approach to energy policy and to siting of energy projects, that's the trend across the country. And
so go in there, let's just get with it. Go.
Yeah, exactly. Go.
Because otherwise, these people who will make money off other stuff in the short term, which I just don't get, like it's only short term, guys, they'll take over. So get involved and help us make the world a better place.
Absolutely help us make the world a better place. So the website again for Mass Climate Action Network is massclimateaction.org. You can reach out to me personally. My email is Sarah, SARAH, at massclimateaction.net. Reach out and if you have a question about the PBD campaign or working on buildings, just drop me an email, and it may take me a day or two to get back, but I will get back to you. And get involved if you're not in Massachusetts. Sometimes people think about energy as kind of this technical, like invisible weird thing to focus on, but it powers everything that we do. And
we're using it right now to talk to each other.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right. Thank you so much, Sarah. It's always a treat to have you on. You'll have to come back in another couple of months and let us know what else is going on. Hopefully someone will listen about the PBD Peaker plan. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say we continue to work with communities and advocates to redirect that investment, and we continue to put pressure on the Baker administration to open up a formal review process, an environmental and health review process. So for folks that want to get involved in that, just check out our website and drop me a line.
Awesome. All right, everybody out there, thank you so much for tuning in. And yeah, everybody has a story to tell. So what's yours?